Again, thank you everybody for attending. I will give you a brief overview of what the webinar will look like for us this morning. At a glance, we will be introducing Concern. We will be looking at what we do and how we do it very briefly. And then we will go straight into the topic of the so-called green transitions. We will look at what we currently understand as solutions to the climate crisis. And then, obviously, we will move on to the human rights perspectives and implications that relate to the so-called green transitions. And we'll finally see how this can relate to Concern's work. So this is the overview of the day. So first and foremost, a little overview of what Concern is. So Concern is an international humanitarian organization who works predominantly to eliminate extreme poverty worldwide. And we do so through a number of different programs with a focus on an array of different topics, going from education to health and nutrition, gender equality, livelihoods, which essentially relates to agriculture, and emergency responses. And the way we break down our activities is as follows. First of all, we respond to emergencies. Now, what classifies as emergencies is everything going from natural disasters, earthquakes, droughts, floods, to conflicts and wars, and also health-related emergencies, clearly. And the way we respond to these events is providing immediate relief to the concerned populations, so providing them with their basic needs. What we also do is more of a long-term set of activities, and that is all relating to development support. Which in fact relates to a more structured and, as I said, long-term type of work. And then what we focus on is also global citizenship education and advocacy. And this has to do with what we're doing today. Global citizenship education essentially involves not only young people, but predominantly young people. And we understand it as a lifelong process of learning about global issues, going through the root causes of them, understanding them with a critical thinking approach. And all of this aims at potentially being able to acquire the skills and capabilities to then take meaningful action to try and tackle some of these issues and solve some of these problems. Now we'd like to show you a video that relates to global citizenship and advocacy, and it's our latest ad. Some of you might have seen it. And yeah, we'd like you to see it.
It may not be our land, not our country, not our crisis, not our hunger, but our history, our scars, our sense of justice reminds us that extreme poverty, wherever it is in the world, is our concern.
Now, we are very fond of this ad, and the reason is it traces a pretty obvious link between Ireland's history and today's issues that multiple populations around the world are facing. And it simply shows that these issues concern us because they're part of our history and because there is a link between us and them, also in terms of responsibility. So since we are, in fact, not only national citizens, but also global citizens as part of a more large perspective, it is also our concern to learn about these topics and potentially take action. So up here you see the map showing the countries that we currently work in. It's 26 countries, and as you see, it's all over the world. Now, these may change over the years according to where emergencies and issues arise. So they are ever changing. But in some of these countries, our activities have been going on for decades. 90% of our staff comes from the country programs, and this is essential, obviously, because it makes our programs stronger and more impactful, since the local population obviously knows their needs and what their best solutions might be best. And so here you have a breakdown of them. I'll pass it on now to Anya to introduce our topic of the day.
Thanks very much, Michelle. So just to quickly look at what is actually meant by sustainable development. And I'm sure many of you are already familiar, but this is the UN's kind of working definition of it. So it's development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And that's according to the UN Brundtland Commission from 1987. So that definition has been around for a while now. And when we think about needs, I suppose we could be quite broad with that. So it's human needs, but also we could consider like the more than human needs, planetary needs as well in that definition. And looking at sustainability, there are 3 pillars that you can see there in the image that we need to consider in order to be sustainable. So when we're thinking about development, when we're thinking about how we want to create the world in new and better ways, we need to consider the economic, the social, and the environmental. So if any one of these pillars isn't being factored in fairly or enough, it's not fair to call it sustainable development. So I'm also sure that everyone here is familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. So these were launched in 2015 as part of the 2030 agenda. So originally they were set out to be achieved by 2030. Now we're getting closer and closer to that date, and progress has been slow. We started well, but it's slowed down for various reasons over the past few years. But all countries around the world signed up to the SDGs, which really put justice, inclusivity, equality at its heart. So the principles of equality and non-discrimination are all been built into the SDGs with a real commitment to leave no one behind and also reach those furthest behind first. So I suppose it's taking a really global look at development and making sure that everyone's benefiting from it. And then very quickly, just some examples of sustainable development that we all know and appreciate are absolutely needed in order to create a more sustainable world. So we definitely need to ramp up and roll out far more public transport that's efficient. We absolutely need green technology, more efficiency in everything that we do, how we work, how we produce things. We definitely need better circular economies. So right now we have a much more linear model where we produce, use, and discard. But I think we're getting a lot better at understanding that we need to reuse what we already have. There are enough materials circulating, and we need to do a much better job of re-encompassing them into our networks of development. We, of course, need to switch from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. And then agroecology is a big part of sustainable development as well. So boosting biodiversity, having water conservation practices, enhancing soil health, and trying to reduce chemical inputs. So all of these are very essential to sustainable development. Now, if you're looking at this topic for your politics and society course, you might be asking some of the following questions. So, who is the sustainable development for? Who at the moment can afford this sustainable development? Is it being rolled out equally across our planet? Where are we sourcing the minerals and materials for this transition? So we know what's needed, what needs to be produced, but are we questioning how much of it do we need to produce? And where are the needs greatest? Are we looking at the cost? So what is the cost of this development? Yes, some of it's needed, but can it be done in a way that isn't exploiting certain populations and places? And then having a think about whose livelihoods are impacted through things like technological advances. So are there smallhold farmers who are now out of work because of technological advances when it comes to agriculture? Okay, or the closure of certain industries. Of course, we understand that, coal and the use of fossil fuels, we need to move away from them. But who's impacted in the process? Are workers who were a part of those industries being taken care of, reskilled, and allowed to find work in other places instead? So the reality, I suppose, of a transition to a green economy at the moment is that it's causing exploitation of people and planet. And really, it's richer countries who are reaping the benefits right now. So how is this green transition being resourced? A lot of mining is needed. So the mining industry requires the annexation of large tracts of land for extraction and transportation. And as you can imagine, the demand for materials is rising. Also, simultaneously, the quality of ores, such as copper, is declining. So we've already extracted the best of the resources and materials from our planet. And now what we find is we're having to go ever deeper to meet those mineral and material requirements for the development that we wish to see. What's happening is more seams, deeper mines are being dug, mountains are being moved, and at the moment it's bringing glittering fortunes to some, while unfortunately many regions, above all in developing countries, become sacrifice zones. So they're left with a lot of emissions, dead space that hurts their economies and hurts people's ability to have like their livelihoods, and it takes away a lot from them. Okay, so a little bit now as well on equal exchange. So when we were putting this webinar together, we were thinking a bit about the following question. So why are countries who are often richest in natural resources often the poorest? One reason for this is something that's called unequal exchange. And it actually results from large net flows of resources from the global south to the global north each year. This drains the global south of resources necessary for development locally, okay? And it means that poverty isn't alleviated. So instead of the resources being used for their own good, they're shipped abroad for markets that can afford to pay more money for them. Instead of these productive capacities, so think of all the labor, energy that goes into mining these materials, moving them and transporting them. So rather than being used for local development, they are appropriated, which means they're extracted and taken to other countries, okay, who have more power, have more money, and therefore have more influence. So they reap these benefits. The energy and materials appropriated each year is actually more than what would be required to bring the whole population of the global south up to decent living standards. So we're talking about a massive amount of materials, resources that are being extracted on a yearly basis. While the global north benefits, okay, and often it actually is driving what we know as overconsumption as well in the north. So absolutely, some of it is meeting vital, green technology needs, developing renewable energy infrastructures, but also an awful lot of it is going to things that we don't need. So technological devices that are built to only last for a couple of years, fast fashion, and I suppose things that are nice to have, but absolutely not necessary. And meanwhile, the ecological impacts are suffered in the south. So the extraction happens here, and that destruction of their local environment wreaks havoc, basically. So the damages are externalized. We don't see it in the global north, but it's absolutely being experienced by those communities in the global south. So one example of this is in the DRC. So this is one country where Concern has been working since the early 90s. And it's one of the poorest countries in the world. So has been for a long time now, but meanwhile, it also has one of the largest reserves of potential wealth. So 200 million acres of cultivable land, large reserves of gold, diamonds, copper, zinc, coltan, and cobalt. So just to quickly outline the uses of some of these materials. So from coltan comes something called tantalum. And that's essential. It's an essential mineral in the manufacture of smartphones. And also tantalum and cobalt. Okay, so both very abundant in the DRC. These minerals keep rechargeable batteries powered. And rechargeable batteries are, of course, important. But yes, that is where the majority of these materials are ending up. So the DRC, by extension, powers our phones, producing 67% of the world's coltan and over 70% of the world's cobalt, all coming from the DRC. So despite this being a lucrative industry, we all know how expensive smartphones, especially iPhones, are. The hundreds and thousands of Congolese, many of whom are children, working in these mines are not seeing adequate compensation for their work. And actually, many aren't paid at all. I'll now pass you back over to Anisha, who's going to walk you through some case studies showing the human rights perspectives of sustainable development.
Thank you, Anya. So to circle back to what Anya has highlighted, there is a human rights perspective to consider when talking about green transitions. We've introduced the DRC case. We'll go over it again in a minute. What we wanted to showcase is three examples, three case studies that we found to really focus on the link between human rights violations and these risks and green transitions. So we will be looking at one example regarding the energy transition first. Then we'll move on to the electric vehicles industry, which we've already touched on. And then finally, we will look at a case of a biodiversity and conservation project. And so for the first case study, we're looking at the case of Lake Turkana Wind Power Project. So this is a project that relates to the surge in the promotion of renewable energy projects, especially in countries that are low to middle income. and they have actually undergone a push to move on from fossil fuels and use more and more sources of clean energy. For those of you who are aware, this topic has been discussed extensively over COP30 a few weeks ago. So the project is now complete. It has been launched in 2006, and by 2018, this wind farm became active. You can see the map on the slide. It is very close to Lake Turkana, obviously. And today, it is Africa's largest wind farm. It is so big that it accounts for approximately 17% of the country's electric capacity. And clearly it had positive impacts, including higher employment rates and clearly the reduction of Kenya's reliance on fossil fuels. So it is estimated that between 2018 and 2021, Kenya actually spent 281 million euros less than the 3 years before. So this obviously represents a major advancement in Kenya's energy industry. But at the same time, indigenous rights issues actually are involved. And that is because in a country where indigenous rights are not legally protected and are not adequately recognized, these groups are more exposed to risks of being exploited. So exploitation can come into play more often than not. And specifically in this project, the 5 local communities that shared the land where the farm was created were not adequately included in the consultation process that led to the creation of the farm. So essentially, these communities were not involved in discussing how much land would be dedicated to the farm. And this was the land they had inherited and they were living on. So as a consequence, the whole process resulted in land dispossession and ultimately in a forced eviction. So many individuals were forced out of their homeland without a legal recognition of this human rights violation. So we can see clearly how when the context is unjust, meaning there are vulnerable communities that are more exposed to risks, then obviously inequalities build up on this context. And regardless of the project that is being created, this can result in human rights violations. So this is one case. The other case relates, as we've already seen a bit, to the electric vehicles industry. Now, as Anya has highlighted, the production of these vehicles is growing consistently globally, and so is the demand for essential minerals that are part of the supply chain of these products. And so we find cobalt, manganese, lithium, coltan, nickel, and other minerals being implied in the production. Now, DRC, as we've seen, is one of the richest countries in essential minerals for these vehicles. And specifically, the DRC accounts for more than half of our global cobalt reserves. And the mining industry in this country dates back to the colonial period. Now, this might sound uninteresting, but obviously, even though the DRC is now an independent country, the legacy of the colonial period persists in the sector. in terms of the dynamics and the financial structures that are behind this lucrative venture. And so when we talk about unequal distribution, we can see how the DRC is one of the richest countries in natural materials, but it is also one of the poorest countries in the world. So 17% of the population today struggles with extreme poverty and lives below the poverty line. Now, why does this relate to human rights? Well, that is because even though the DRC's constitution prohibits child labor and sets the minimum working age at 16, the majority of the population does not have a choice. And they find themselves without a viable alternative to involving their children in mining activities. So once again, when one experiences conditions of marginalization, then anything else that comes after adds on to a situation that is already unjust, where people have a very limited choice and resort to actions that lead to human rights violations, and in this case, children's human rights violations. Lastly, to touch on the topic of biodiversity and conservation projects, we wanted to show you the case again of the DRC and its implication in the creation of a large protected reserve in the area of the so-called Copper Belt, which you can see on this map. This project of biodiversity and conservation was launched in the 1970s, where the national park was first established. The park is obviously an incredible and valuable attempt to preserve and protect the country's plant species and animal species. But as much as it is obviously well intended, it caused the forced eviction of the indigenous Batwa community, which had been living on the area for centuries. And obviously this led to a vicious cycle of impoverishment, heightened mortality rates, and discrimination. This case is very similar to the one that we've seen about Kenya's wind farm project. And again, it relates to the fact that indigenous communities often find themselves without protection and recognition, and often bear the brunt of green transition ventures. So the African Commission of Human and People's Rights actually in 2024 recognized that this was a violation of human rights. But this decision came decades after the Batwa were displaced. And actually as many as 13,000 individuals were forced out of their lands. So it had a major impact on the local community. Now, the way this relates to concern might not seem immediate to grasp. And that is mainly because concern does not specifically have programs that relate to human rights protection. What we do, though, is we work consistently for the elimination of extreme poverty worldwide. And poverty is actually a very complex, multifolded issue. We might think it only relates to one's income, to one's wealth and economic resources, but actually poverty is much more complex than that. And it has to do with our access to basic needs, from food to water and shelter, sanitation, health systems, but also to our access to cultural and social assets, from community inclusion to education services, and also to our ability to express our voice, our choice, our political inclinations. So it is a variety. There is a variety of different aspects that need to be considered when talking about poverty. And so we can talk about poverty in terms of lack of resources to lead a dignified and valuable life overall. Now, obviously, when people live in poverty, they lack those resources, and as a consequences, they are more exposed to marginalization, and they are more vulnerable. They can risk more often than not being displaced, dispossessed, and having limited choice over their lives. This is why we understand that tackling poverty through its various dimensions can actually play a part in reducing the risk of people finding themselves in unjust situations and bearing the brunt of, in this case, what we call green transitions. So to give you an idea of how we tackle poverty, we'll walk you through a few of our programs. First of all, what we focus on is livelihoods. Obviously, we mean agricultural systems mostly, and that is because most of the communities that we work in low to middle income countries, are communities that live off agricultural activities. And obviously, our programs aim to actually provide people with tools to live sustainably and on their own. This obviously does not only have to do with producing more food. It encompasses helping them learn new skills and abilities and adapt to a changing context, because we have to remember that we live in a context of changing climate, and that is absolutely has an impact. We also focus on obviously improving their productivity, but also the nutritional value of the food that they produce. And then our work focuses also on helping them set up business ventures to support them generating an income. And so not only producing for their livelihoods, but actually earning an income off of the activities that they do. So in 2024, as you can see, our programs reached over 2.5 million people. And the way that we structure our programs encompasses a variety of activities. Income support is intended for people to have a financial type of help while they dedicate themselves to agricultural activities. We obviously provide them with business skills training, but also coaching and mentoring to help them develop the capacities that they need. We help them with financial services, making sure they have enough money to invest in potential businesses. And finally, when needed, we support them looking for an employment. Alongside livelihoods programs, we also focus on education, which is often indicated as the key to break the poverty cycle. And what we want to reach is basically improving the lives of children experiencing extreme poverty through a sustainable way. And obviously, as you know, education is key for every child's development, but also it increases their opportunities, not only in terms of cultural and social assets, but also in terms of future employment. And then education is a very powerful tool to reduce inequalities within a community. So to make sure that everyone in a community has access to quality education. So what we do is increasing access to education, so making sure numbers grow. And then also improving the quality of education, making sure teachers are properly trained and making sure students are properly trained. And we do this in particular through our early grade reading assessment tool, among others. And finally, we make sure the environment in which the children learn is safe, welcoming, and supports them emotionally and psychologically in their education journey. And finally, we can take a look at our gender equality programs. Now, we aim to include a gender equality approach in any program that we roll out. And when you think about it, this is key because actually gender equality can be regarded as the most common and widespread form of inequality. And that is simply because 50% of the global population is made of women. And women consistently face structural inequalities in any domain, from their family background to their social community, to their access to education, to employment possibilities, and obviously this also relates to the political sphere. So whenever we implement a program, we have that gender equality approach, and that can look like many different things. For example, we engage in community dialogues, which you can see in the top picture. Community dialogues are extremely effective, and just like those, we aim at including men consistently in the programs that we do, and that also relates to École des Mairies. This is obviously because men are impacted by gender roles and stereotypes as much as women, and they need to be part of the conversation for structural change to happen. Then we also focus on education programs on gender-based violence in a number of country programs, from Liberia to Sierra Leone to Syria. And we always make sure we include counseling and health promotion activities in any session that we do. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Anita. Yeah, that's brilliant. Nice look at what Concern does, I suppose, to work on poverty and make sure that communities aren't as vulnerable to exploitation and other risks. And now we'll take a little look at what we can do. So sometimes we're looking at these I suppose, what's happening around the world, and it can feel very daunting. And also, it's hard to make that connection, I suppose, to our own world and our own experiences. But we said we'd break it down a little bit and look at individual all the way up to global approaches that we can take in order to make a difference. So I'll put them all up here on the screen so you can see them. The idea with the pyramid is that you absolutely don't have to be taking action at all levels simultaneously all the time. Sometimes it might be enough just to do an action or two at the individual level. And then there'll be times where there's opportunities to support a local initiative or to have impact at that national level. But it absolutely doesn't have to be that you're tackling every layer of the pyramid at the same time, all the time. So at the individual level, one of the most important things to do is to keep educating yourselves. So attending webinars like today is a great example. Studying politics and society and digging deeper into these issues and the root causes is hugely important. We can't solve these issues if we don't know why they exist. So keep educating yourselves and keep talking about what you're learning. Talk with your friends, talk with your families. That's how we change mindsets. And then turn to more ethical choices where you can. So I know it's pretty much impossible to exist without things like smartphones these days. But do try and explore sustainable alternatives where you can. So there are smartphones, there's sustainable smartphones. They can be very expensive, but maybe it's worth looking at how often we end up changing our iPhones. And would it be better to buy a fair phone instead? It's a bit more expensive, but if it's going to last longer, maybe that's an investment worth making. And then at the individual level, I suppose trying to repair and fix what we can over buying new. I do think we live in an economy at the moment that promotes new and better every few months, whereas there's nothing wrong with trying to fix what we've already got where possible. And then recycling electronic goods is hugely important as well. So as we kind of covered earlier in the presentation, there's already enough minerals and materials circulating without digging up anymore. So there's a lot of work we can do in reusing what's already there and in circulation. And that can happen at the individual level as well through recycling practices. And then at the local level, it's things like maybe organizing a campaign within your school. If you're doing a project, say, on this theme for your politics and society course, could you give a presentation to another class in your school? It could be volunteering with a network doing something, maybe to clear up some waste in your locality. And a lot of the time, there's already networks there. So there's people working on these issues with loads of expertise, and maybe they're paid through organizations to do good and supporting those networks as well. So sometimes it's just finding your space. You don't have to start from scratch and join the voices that are already shouting for change. We do have a group called Concern Connect that could be worth looking into. So it's for young people interested in global issues and trying to take action in their local areas where they can. So it's a really nice way to meet like-minded young people and brainstorm solutions. So action is a big part of the network. And then at the national level, it's putting the pressure on our politicians where we can. So I know maybe there's a lot of students who might not yet be 18, but if you can pre-register to vote. So you can do that at 17. And also you can email and reach out to your politicians no matter your age. So it's important that they, listen to everyone. Who got them to where they are. They're supposed to be representing us all. And that includes young people. So making sure that Ireland continues to prioritise ODA, so Official Development Assistance. We've been pretty good so far, and the government are promising to maintain the levels of ODA that we provide. But I guess keeping that pressure on them to meet Ireland's responsibility to support other countries. And even ramp it up because it is so needed at the moment with the amount of struggles that other peoples and populations are experiencing, especially with the growing challenge of climate change. And then other things that like pressuring our government officials to support fair trade laws, fair exchange of resources also. And then on the global level, it's making sure that we're contributing to the SDGs, that we're supporting countries maybe that have less money, less resources. So supporting them as well, because it needs to be a global, united approach. It can't just be countries taking a nationalistic inward approach. Really, these issues are global, so it necessitates a global response. So, yeah. And I think the other thing that links a lot with the presentation today is that circular economy as well. So pushing for things to be much more sustainable rather than always pushing for new, which tends to be more lucrative and lead to more profits. It's not what's best for the earth, and it's not what's best for us. So it's pushing for things to be as circular as possible as well. And just to finish up, it's remembering that a green transition will not suffice. So a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is good, but good for some. It's not actually good for everyone, and it's causing massive injustices across the world. So in reality, in order to have a just transition, which means it is green, but it's also just for everyone, that's needed so that no one is left behind, which is what the SDGs were set out to achieve. So thank you everyone for attending. We're going to stop recording the call now. And if you do have any questions, please pop them into the chat, or we can unmute microphones if you want to pop in and ask us any